Excellent. So it's about 2 minutes after the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, appreciate all of you taking time out of your afternoon to be here with us this afternoon. We are going to share a little bit about the collective real estate ownership funding opportunity that is coming out of Miami Open for Business. I do want to share that this webinar is being recorded. We will upload both the slides and the recording to our website. This is also the same version of an info session that we will be giving on Thursday morning at 10 a.m. So in case this is not the best time for you to make it, or you have registered for both of them, please know that this is the same information session simply being offered at 2 different times, so to maximize your ability to attend. With that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share a little bit to begin about the program at large. You may have heard about the Miami Open for Business program at the Miami Foundation. Our goal here is really to support historically underserved small businesses and nonprofits to build resilience and generational wealth through asset ownership. This initiative was made possible by a $20 million grant from Wells Fargo that is devoted to asset ownership. We know historically, looking at some of the disparities in wealth and asset ownership, we know that there have not always been equal opportunities for entrepreneurs and for communities and families of color to build wealth. And that is the overall goal of this initiative. We are facilitating grants and loans to help small businesses and nonprofits buy more of their own assets, including technology, equipment, machinery, inventory, all the way through to property. This particular webinar today is going to discuss the real estate ownership opportunity. Just to give you all a sense of how the flow of today will go, we're going to spend at least the first half hour walking through core details about the program. Many of these details may answer early questions that you have. Then we'll open it up for Q&A and discussion. If you have very, very specific questions about your proposal, such as, the neighborhood, the viability of it, the types of businesses who will be involved, etc., please email those to us separately offline. We'd like to be able to give you some individualized response and attention. So again, if your question is hyper specific to your potential proposal, please be sure to email us offline. And lastly, if you attended today and need today's info session available in Spanish, please let us know in the chat so that we can follow up with you and make sure you get all of the materials. These materials are available on our website in Spanish, but if you'd like to receive the information session in Spanish, please let us know in the chat. Excellent. And before we dive in, okay, Renee, gracias por notificarnos. Just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware that our website is chock full of resources in addition to the info session you'll receive today. If any of you are here attending on behalf of a provider, we have these helpful flyers that you can distribute to share news and awareness about the initiative. We also have a FAQ document where you can learn a lot of the questions that have been asked already. Please note that we will be updating this FAQ document on a regular basis based on the questions we receive in these info sessions. We also have a program overview flyer, which you may wish to share, again, to spread the word about the initiative. And then lastly, we have a detailed funding guidelines document. I highly encourage you, whether it's for this real estate opportunity or any other funding opportunity for Miami Open for Business, to look at the detailed funding guideline document on our website. This will provide you a lot more detail about eligibility, what you can use the funding for, and a preview of the application questions so that you can start working on them before you begin your application. Highly recommend taking a look at the detailed funding guidelines on our website before beginning your application. We're also so proud that all of these resources are available in Spanish and Haitian Creole. So if you have a community for whom you'd like to share this flyer with or access the detailed funding guidelines, you can do so in all 3 languages. Excellent. So just to recap, Miami Open for Business is offering a variety of financial products, all the way from smaller dollar micro grants through to commercial real estate assistance. We have offered some information sessions about the micro grants and the loans already. We will be offering 2 more, one next Thursday, this Thursday, and one next Tuesday. The focal point for today's conversation, however, is really going to be the the collective real estate ownership funding opportunity. And so we're just going to be talking about this particular funding opportunity. There's different eligibility criteria. There's a different application. If you are interested in these other offerings, please be sure to register for one of those other info sessions on our website. Depending on whether you are a for-profit or a nonprofit organization, you apply for the microgrants and loans on a different portal. I do want to clarify that for this collective real estate ownership opportunity, you will only apply on the Miami Open for Business submittable platform. This is irrespective of whether you are a nonprofit, whether you are a for-profit business. If you are interested in applying for the commercial collective real estate ownership opportunity, you will apply through the Miami Foundation. Each year, we anticipate awarding a total of $2.2 million to approximately 4 to 6 partnerships. This exact number will vary based on the caliber of the applications we receive, how many collaboratives are ready to engage in the real estate acquisition process, as well as the dollar amount that is requested. So please note that these are approximate values, but this is the amount of award money that we do hope to administer annually. So with all that said, let's dive a little bit deeper into the specifics for the collective real estate ownership opportunity. For this particular funding opportunity, you need to apply as a collaborative. This means more than one, a minimum of 2 organizations that are currently located in and serving Miami-Dade County. This can be a collaborative of all nonprofits, all small businesses, or nonprofits and or small businesses. The more diversity and the greater number of businesses included in the collaborative, the more likely it is that you will be able to secure funding. And per the funder guidelines, we do need to see that the individuals who lead these organizations hail from a historically underserved background. And so this is consistent with all of the eligibility criteria for the initiative, again, in accordance with the funder guidelines. We would like to see organizations that have been in existence for at least 2 years, who have a track record of providing services to the community. This is not necessarily a funding initiative to support startups or folks who need startup capital to start their business. We'd really like to support those legacy and or existing businesses that have been doing work for some time. I do want to flag that there is no annual gross revenue or operating budget maximum for this particular funding opportunity. You may be aware that for our micro grants and our loans, you cannot have more than $1 million in gross revenue or operating budget. That particular budget maximum does not apply for the collective real estate ownership opportunity. However, all of the residents to occupy the subject property must still be small businesses that hail from an underserved background. The other unique aspect of this initiative is that to receive real estate support, the subject property must be in one of the Miami Open for Business priority target neighborhoods. Whereas for the grants and the loans, you may receive some extra priority points when you apply. If for this particular opportunity, it is an eligibility criteria that you must be located in one of these communities. I do want to pause. I see a great question in the chat about what constitutes a collaborative. We will definitely talk through that in more detail, give you some information about how the lead applicant will apply on behalf of the collaborative, and share a little bit more about the constituent members of the collaborative as well. To unpack the priority neighborhoods a little bit further, I am showcasing a map and listing the neighborhoods that are currently eligible for the collective real estate ownership opportunity. We're really prioritizing and emphasizing these neighborhoods as they have been historically underinvested and overlooked with regard to capital and commercial real estate development. We know that there are so many great small businesses in these neighborhoods, but they may not all have had equal opportunity for ownership and equity. And so we are prioritizing these neighborhoods. We led with the list of Miami-Dade targeted urban areas that have been established to showcase some of these communities. Depending on the volume and the quality of the applications that we receive in this funding cycle, we may elect to include additional community areas in the future. However, at this time, these are the primary 7 communities that the subject property must be located in order to qualify for this funding opportunity. Moving ahead, so we've shown you and explained what the eligibility parameters are. Those are things that you must you must abide by and meet in order to apply for this opportunity. Once you apply, however, we will begin to review and score each proposal along these following dimensions. And so, for instance, which historically underserved backgrounds the proprietors represent. For instance, if there's more than one dimension that is represented by the organization, that'll be taken account in the scoring and review process. We also want to elevate and prioritize organizations that provide a community good or service. It doesn't matter whether you repair watches and jewelry or whether you provide after school tutoring. All of our small businesses help fill a need and a gap in the market. The better that you can communicate and the more that you can explain how your organization benefits the local community, the better. We do need to state that businesses that are in particular industries, such as firearms, liquor stores, check cashing, pawn shops, etc., are not necessarily eligible to receive funding through this opportunity. So we will be prioritizing organizations and businesses that are serving the community, however you define that. We'll also be scoring applications based on the collaborative and the constituent businesses' organizational and financial capacity. For example, your organization can effectively deploy funding. This would be evidenced by your financial statements and your cash flow projections. We also want to make sure that all of the businesses have sufficient cash flow and revenue to remain operational. This is especially germane for the loans and for the commercial real estate. We want to make sure that this business collaborative has enough revenue to pay the future mortgage of the property in the next couple of years. We also want to make sure that the organization has all of its documentation in order. For example, business tax licenses with Miami-Dade County are kept up to date, that the organization has been incorporated properly. For this particular funding cycle, it is likely that we will be prioritizing collaboratives who already have a pre-existing relationship with a mortgage lender and or have already been pre-approved for a mortgage. This is, again, none of these items, it is not necessarily a requirement for your organization to have a mortgage pre-approval, but do know that during the scoring and review process, collaboratives with that evidence pre-approval will receive extra prioritization during the scoring process. We will also be prioritizing firms that offer quality jobs and employment opportunities, especially employment opportunities to individuals from historically underserved backgrounds, and quality jobs that offer at least a living wage, fringe benefits, etc. For this particular funding opportunity, sole proprietorships are not eligible to apply. If you are a sole proprietorship and you're interested in financial support through Open for Business, we really encourage you to look at the micro grants and the loan offerings. But for this opportunity, sole proprietorships are not eligible. We hope that most of the organizations to reside at the subject property have staff and or consultants that they retain, and we will be looking at the number of full-time equivalent jobs that are associated with your project as part of the scoring and review. We also really want to understand how this funding would transform the trajectory not only of the lead applicant, but the constituent businesses. For example, is this opening a new location? Is this allowing you to add more staff, to serve more children, to produce more widgets? However, this investment will really catalyze your business growth and trajectory. Help us understand that so we can appraise that during the scoring and review process. The final criterion that is unique to the collective real estate ownership opportunity is that we'd really like to see organizations that can provide a bit of equity in the purchase and transaction process. So collaboratives who can bring some of their own funding or they can bring grant dollars to the transaction, not only are they more likely to be successful during the sale and the subsequent ownership of the property, they will also receive some prioritization during the review process. Later in this presentation, we'll show you the budget template. We'll talk about allowable cost under the funding model, but just know that these are the dimensions that each application will be scored, reviewed, and assessed in order to prioritize who receives funding. I do want to just head off a couple of common questions that we're receiving, not just about this funding opportunity, but about all of the Miami Open for Business funding opportunities. You can apply for more than one type of funding. So your organization can put your name in the ring for a technology micro grant, a remodeling loan, and this opportunity for collective real estate ownership. However, if you receive funding through any one of those three categories, you cannot continue to apply within that category again, so that we can maximize the number of businesses who receive funding. If you don't receive funding despite applying, you are also eligible to keep applying in the future. We're so excited that this is a multi-year initiative. We're going to be offering 2 additional funding cycles every year for the next 2 years. So that's a total of 5 rounds of funding. If you aren't selected in this round, you can definitely continue to reapply. Some folks wonder if they can ask for more than one use case or purpose in a grant or loan. So for instance, can you apply for a grant for both technology and equipment? Can you apply for a loan for both vehicles and remodeling? No, at this time, we really want to maximize how many organizations can benefit from Open for Business funding. So if you are interested in more than one item or use case, we ask you to prioritize that in your funding request. Lastly, we know that there's a lot of applications out right now, and you may be confused or wondering which one you should apply for first. We do want to state that the micro grant and the collective real estate opportunities have a fixed deadline. All micro grant applications are due on Monday, November 7th. The real estate applications are due on Monday, November 28th. So if you do have, short time or would like to understand which to prioritize, I definitely recommend getting your applications in for these opportunities as soon as possible. The loan fund will continue to accept applications on a rolling basis. However, we will close the loan fund on December 1st to allow the finance team at our lending organization to process applications. Or if we exceed our loan allotment allocation for that cycle, we may potentially close earlier. I'm going to pause. We're about to get into some more details and specifics about the application, but I do want to pause because there are some great questions in the chat. Danielle Estes asked, when you say led by, can this refer to a board president of the nonprofit? Danielle, that's a really great question, and it's going to depend on how your organization is structured and who leads the organization. In many cases, this typically refers to the CEO or the executive director of that organization. But if the board president has a lot of oversight into the day-to-day activities of that organization or is putting together that organization's activities and has, again, a programmatic oversight, that is a possibility. An anonymous attendee has asked, are you involved in the collaboration or put business together based on their business, or I have to have a business I want to collaborate with already? This is a great question. So first of all, the constituent businesses do already need to be operational for at least 2 years. However, the collaborative may not necessarily already be formed. Maybe I'll give an example. You rent a stall and you operate a lash business, but you have, 2 best friends. One of them does nails and one of them does hair. Maybe you all are individual business owners and you've been operational for at least 2 years, but you are now finally having discussions around potential ownership. That would be a collaborative that you would newly form and put together and propose for this particular funding opportunity. Tanya has asked, can the micro grant be in the Little Havana location? Yes, Tanya, that's a great question. If you're applying for the micro grant or the loan, you can be located anywhere in Miami-Dade County. You do not you're not required to be located in a particular community. If you are interested in this collective real estate ownership opportunity, you do need to be located in one of the neighborhoods that we are prioritizing for commercial real estate ownership. Marianne has asked, does the collaborative have to have site control in order to apply for the down payment request? That's a great question, Marianne. The idea is that at the end of the day, the collaborative will ultimately own the property for which they are planning to apply. I'm going to walk through some more detail about how this funding will work, and then we will answer any further questions, because that may actually help answer your questions as we walk through the purchase process. Alina asked whether the sole proprietorship applies to nonprofits. So if the nonprofit is a single person organization, yes, that still counts. We really want to see members of the collaborative be employer firms that have multiple opportunities. I do want to clarify, when we call this opportunity, collective real estate ownership, it's really implied that there will be ownership and wealth creation, equity building pathways for more than one owner. So this is not necessarily an initiative to allow individual down payment support for one person to own their own business. It's really structured to facilitate shared wealth creation. And I'm going to see some additional questions in the chat. Danny has asked, if we have a pre-approval but aren't selected for this round, would you need to have a renewed pre-approval to be considered? That's a great question, Danny. We do know that some of those mortgage pre-approvals expire, especially if you are thinking about getting in under locking in a certain interest rate, or the purchase price of your property changes. It is not a requirement to have a mortgage pre-approval when you apply, but it will definitely give you a leg up in the process. So we ask if you will apply in the future to have a most recent up-to-date mortgage pre-approval available as an attachment. Awesome. Some really great questions coming in. It's clear that you all have given this so much thought. We're going to go ahead and start. I would love to showcase kind of the details of the funding opportunity, and then revisit the questions, because your questions may be answered throughout the course of the presentation. Before we dive in, I just want to answer the question that we receive so often. A lot of folks may need extra support working on their application, whether that's getting your financial affairs in order, whether that's responding to the narrative questions. We're very excited that beginning next year, the program is going to have some specific technical assistance organizations and resources in place to help you. We plan on having a commercial real estate workshop series. However, in the meantime, we really encourage you to reach out to the network of small business technical assistance organizations that are already out there. They provide great low cost and no cost services to entrepreneurs. So for example, if you need help with cash flow projections, if you need help with preparing some of the financial statements, or getting in contact with a mortgage lender, write down the names of these organizations and definitely consider reaching out to them and working with them while you think about preparing your application. And if you aren't ready to apply yet to this cycle, let's say we get through the end of the presentation and you realize that you are nowhere near applying for a mortgage, you don't have your collaborative buddies together yet, that's quite all right. We will be offering, again, 2 funding cycles every year for the next 2 years. Excellent. So now I'm going to walk through a lot more specific detail about how this program is intended to work, what constitutes a collaborative, what you can include in your funding request, and how it will be operationalized. So the objective of this program is really to provide financial assistance in the format of covering the down payment and select closing costs, so that underserved small businesses and nonprofits can own their own commercial real estate through a shared equity or collective ownership model. I did fail to mention at the outset that this program, Open for Business, was designed with so much stakeholder input. We met with dozens and dozens of small businesses, nonprofits, chambers of commerce, community and government representatives. And one thing we heard across the board is that a lot of you all can make the monthly mortgage payment happen. It's really that upfront capital that is precluding you from buying. And another reason we've selected the neighborhoods that we have is that we know that they are quite targets for, quickly pacing gentrification and displacement. The objective of providing this down payment assistance is really to allow community nonprofits and small businesses to root in place by providing that upfront capital. However, that does mean that a collaborative must be prepared to secure financing to purchase the remainder of the property. When we say collaborative, we're referring to a partnership of at least 2 or more organizations. They don't all need to be the same type of organization. This can be a mix of nonprofit, 501c3s, for-profit small businesses, social enterprises, or even governmental agencies and organizations like a CDC or a CRA. We may actually encourage, a mixed bag. Like if there is a subject property that is half nonprofits and half for-profits, we think that that's a really great mix and an excellent way to foster local community economic development. You need to decide as a collaborative who will be the lead applicant who will submit a proposal on behalf of the collaborative. The lead applicant needs to be prepared to submit very detailed financial information on behalf of the lead organization. as well as collect information from the constituent businesses. So the lead applicant will need to be prepared to complete a roster that describes each of the proposed occupants or co-owners. Also understand how many jobs are associated with each of those businesses, what their specialty is, etc. There is a roster in the application that you will complete, but I'll provide a little bit more detail about the application questions and narrative itself. I'm seeing a couple questions in the chat about the collaborative structure, so I'm going to pause and answer them briefly. What if there's one business located in the selected area and the other is in Broward? Can we still collaborate since one business is in the selected area? The idea with this down payment assistance is that all of the collaborative businesses will plan to occupy and reside or how to conduct businesses affairs in that location. And so if the business in Broward is planning to move on site, then that would be a possibility. But the idea is that all of the constituent businesses would be located and would operate out of this commercial real estate property. Excellent. So just to share a little bit more about this funding request, as you may have seen advertised, this maximum award amount will be $500,000 per collaborative / subject property. And what this can include, we'll talk about in a moment, but this is a funding request that will be issued in over the lifetime of a 5-year grant. And this will be a recoverable grant so that certain conditions are met as the collaborative goes through the purchase process. The allowable expenses that you can include within this $500,000 includes the down payment, provided that the down payment that you are requesting is not more than 20% of the purchase price of the property. 20% of a purchase price, if you were to allocate the full $500,000 to down payment, is approximately a $2.5 million property. So that is a benchmark or a ballpark to help you understand the purchase price if you were to allocate the entire funding request to down payment alone. We know, however, that commercial real estate, any real estate acquisition rather, is quite costly. There's a lot more that goes into it than just the down payment. And for that reason, the Miami Open for Business funding request can also include the following expenses. So for instance, discount points. Those are points that you buy down and you pay for at the closing to reduce the interest rate on the property, which helps reduce your overall monthly mortgage payment. Attorney fees, you do need to retain a real estate attorney to help you with the closing and the document process. The litany of closing fees that are charged at the closing. So for instance, doc fees, survey fees, courier fees, recording fees, title fees, etc. Closing fees can often total anywhere from 3 to 8% of the entire purchase price. So we know that they can be quite costly and cost prohibitive to owning real estate, as well as title insurance and title fees, as mentioned. The idea is that the Miami Open for Business contribution will be issued at the closing to help cover these costs and the down payment at the point of the transaction. As such, the collaborative should be prepared to incur and pay the fees that will occur before the transaction and the closing. So for example, the inspection and the appraisal of the property, applying for the mortgage with your mortgage lender, background checks, etc. For some properties, you often need to conduct an environmental study, and you will have to pay for that prior to the closing, as well as the earnest money deposit, which is often a small percentage of, or a couple $1,000s of the entire down payment and purchase price. The idea is that the collaborative should have some skin in the game and should be committed to this transaction and to make it work. And provided that the collaborative can pay these fees up front, we will provide the full funding request if you are awarded the grant, and will pay for these items at the closing table. Just to dive into this process a little bit further, I started to discuss what is a performance-based recoverable grant. And the essence of this is you will not ever receive the funding direct to your bank account. It is not the expectation that the foundation will award an individual business, $200,000 or $300,000, but rather we are seen as an additional funding partner or an additional lender, if you will. If your proposal is selected and you're in the middle of the purchase process, we will award and issue your organization 2 documents that will help you throughout the transaction process. The first of which is a gift funds letter. This indicates that we are selecting your organization and are committed to funding your organization, provided you've reached the closing table. We will also author a recoverability contract and schedule, which will govern how the funds will be forgiven over the 5-year grant period. We want to make sure that we're not just helping folks purchase a commercial real estate opportunity, but they are keeping this community, this organization and this property in the community. They are not reselling it or flipping it within the 5-year time horizon. We also want to make sure that a collective ownership model is instituted. We would be remiss to help facilitate the purchase of a property and come to find out that only one owner is managing it and is retaining all of the accrued equity over the 5-year period. We will also make sure that there's a minimum number of quality jobs and or organizations associated with the property. So let's say that you indicated that there would be 3 businesses on site. We'll use the example earlier of the co-owned salon between nails, lashes, and hair. A certain as the time horizon of the grant proceeds over the next 5 years, making sure that that commitment of the businesses who are going to occupy it and share it remains instituted. And at the end of the 5-year period, provided that you have met all of the milestones in the recoverability schedule and contract, the full amount of the grant will be forgiven. This does mean that if you are to break any of the conditions in the recoverability schedule, let's say that you sell the property at the 3-year mark, approximately 2/5, that is the 2 remaining years of the 5-year grant, are subject to be repaid to the foundation, given that the clauses of the recoverable grant, the performance clauses, were not met. I know that this is a lot of information. I don't know that we have historically offered recoverable grants. They're very common in impact investing, but this may be a new space or a new frontier for a lot of folks. And so feel free to ask any questions in the chat about the recoverable grant, the format in which it's issued, and the funding process at large. What I'd like to go ahead and segue into now is the shared or collective ownership models for this opportunity. As mentioned a handful of times, we really see this as an opportunity to allow multiple business owners to build equity and experience wealth creation versus a single proprietor or a single landowner at a time. So we are presenting 4 different collective ownership models that you will be asked to select and endorse and explain in your application. The first of which is a community land trust. And I was going to issue a poll to ask folks whether they have heard of any of these opportunities in the past. So as we walk through each of them, you can let me know in the chat. The first shared ownership model is a land trust, in which often a nonprofit organization purchases the property as the steward of the land trust and offers permanent opportunities to keep the property affordable. The nonprofit organization may operate as either a nonprofit landlord, or may subsequently divide the parcel and offer ownership opportunities. And if any business owner leaves the land trust, those properties are always resold at a formula that keeps them perpetually affordable. This differs from a commercial real estate landlord that is a for-profit landlord that will be more profit motivated and profit seeking. So to concretize a community land trust in an example, this may be a community development corporation or a 501c3 who purchases a commercial facility and then leases each of those stalls or subunits in that commercial property to business owners at affordable market rents. If those business owners ever leave or break their lease, or they choose to sell their stall, if you chose the ownership route, there is a resale formula that ensures that the next owner who occupies that space is able to experience it at an affordable rate, rather than a for-profit leaseholder who will be maximizing profit and who will not necessarily be committed to keeping those stalls affordable. The second ownership model that we are describing in this opportunity is a shared space. This is a property that a mixture and allows opportunities for multiple vendors or multiple shopkeepers to sell their wares and lease or purchase a component of the facility. Many common examples that you may see around town include food halls, where there is an entire property, but there's individual restaurateurs or individual bakeries who can sell their goods. That may include a co-working space. We know that the co-working space has been a little bit harder to come by since the closure of many go-to co-working spaces during the pandemic. This allows startups, this allows offices, professionals who need some space to work out of, but maybe can't incur the full overhead of a commercial lease to have a place to operate their business, and many other examples. So farmers markets, craft fairs, flea markets, maybe a boutique wherein there's multiple vendors who are selling their goods. The idea is that there's more than one entrepreneur operating under that roof and has the opportunity to sell their goods and occupy space at a more affordable rate. The next ownership model, which I do conjecture will probably be the most common, is a joint tenancy or a tenancy in common purchase agreement. Joint tenancy basically refers to a purchase agreement between more than one entity in which the property rights at the point of contract are divided amongst more than one party during the sale. Joint tenancy is usually a 50-50 split. There's two individuals in the purchase agreement and they will own the property rights in half. Tenancy in common arrangement is usually when there is more than two proprietors at the table, in which case you will divide the property rights into percentages. This often means that owner can sell their rights at any given point in the future. Let's say that they would like to leave the purchase and there are three owners, they would get paid out approximately 33% of the accrued or the appreciated value at that time in the future. This is, again, in essence, a purchase agreement where there's multiple parties and thus multiple property rights. I'll give some examples further below. This could either be two business owners who come together to jointly own a facility, or this could be as many as 5 business owners take the property and divide the rights into 20% shares due to there being 5 business owners. Joint tenancy is very common and often seen in the residential real estate space. And so we know that to execute any one of these shared ownership models, you will need to, and we encourage you to confer with a legal counsel or attorney. We're going to provide some resources at the end of this presentation for you to explore these shared ownership models further. But for that reason, attorneys' fees due at the closing are able to be included in your funding request for this opportunity. The fourth and final shared ownership model for this opportunity is a cooperative ownership, in which anybody, not just the business owners, but even community members, can purchase the right to own shares of the overall property. So a co-op, you may have seen them elsewhere. There are often like grocery co-ops that have members who pay into the organization. There right now is a project in North Miami operationalized by Catalyst Miami, the North Miami Community Investment Cooperative, where Catalyst is in the process of purchasing a building and then is offering community residents the opportunity to buy and own shares of that property. And as the property appreciates over time, individuals can experience a little bit of shared and accrued equity by virtue of buying shares at the outset. I do want to note that this process of cooperative ownership and shares is definitely logistically challenging. It does implicate a lot of legal parameters and especially like securities law. And so you will definitely want to appraise which of these is most feasible, which of these you have maybe already thought about with your peer businesses who will inhabit the property. And of course, if you have any further questions, we have some resources at the end of this presentation. And we definitely also encourage you to speak to an attorney or legal counsel to understand how to operationalize a purchase agreement and governance plan for these shared ownership opportunities. I know we're having some great questions that are coming in the chat. For that reason, this webinar is technically an hour and a half long. So I'm going to just continue with the remainder of the presentation, and then we'll open it up for these excellent questions I see coming in the chat. I did want to showcase the application questions that you will need to be prepared to respond to if you are interested in this opportunity. If you've seen the microgrant application, it's definitely a lot briefer. This application is going to go into all of the nuts and bolts of not only the project and the property itself, your plan to manage the collaborative, your plan to afford and finance the building or the facility, the impact that you foresee, and we'll also begin conducting some due diligence to ensure that the recipients of these funds and these partnerships that we take on have been vetted. So the first of which, do be prepared to describe the site that you are interested in. It is optimal if you already have an address or a handful of addresses identified. You'll want to describe the current condition of the site. Is it a warehouse? Is it a vacant office building? Is it a a lot that you plan to turn into, some sort of open air market? We definitely want to better understand the site in its current state and its plans for future use. And what additional activities do you need to incur to take that site from the transaction to occupancy? Is there demolition? Is there remodeling? Can you move in as is? How are you going to furnish that space, etc.? There will be a lot of questions to better understand the property, its current state, and its future plans. We would then like to understand the collaborative a little bit better. Which of the following are the shared ownership models that we just showcased are you planning to institute? How will you govern that, right? If you are adopting a tenancy in common arrangement, how will you make sure that when somebody decides to share their rights or their share of the business, how you will go through that sale and transaction process? What thought have you given to resale formulas in the future? We also want to make sure that we understand all of the organizations that will occupy this property. So this is the moment that you want to talk to those fellow collaborative members, understand who is the lead of each of those organizations, whether that be the CEO, the board director, or the majority owner. How many employees do they have? What is their industry focus area, etc. This is also where we'd like to better understand whether the collaborative has already begun engaging in the mortgage approval process. Do you have a lender? Do you have a realtor? Do you have a real estate attorney? Have you thought about property insurance, etc.? There are a lot of considerations that go into the acquisition process, and we'd like to understand whether you have made these relationships already or whether you are at the very beginning stages of the acquisition process. We will also be asking questions about the financials. What is the overall purchase price of the property in question? We understand that this may be an open-ended question depending on whether you're planning to pursue an off-market sale or you have a building on the market that you've already been eyeing. We want to better understand its current price and the price for which you plan to offer, and also how you will finance the remainder of the building. Will you secure a conventional mortgage? Do you have some additional grants or investments that you can leverage? How much money is your collaborative bringing to the transaction? This includes the expenses that we outlined a couple minutes ago, such as the inspection and appraisal fees, or any additional money that you will be paying in the down payment. And then just understanding kind of your net balance at the end of the month. Do you understand what your monthly mortgage obligation will be? How much rental income do you anticipate from the businesses who will inhabit or occupy the site in relationship to that monthly mortgage payment obligation? Remembering, of course, that it's not just the monthly mortgage payment, but it also includes taxes, insurance, repairs, maintenance, etc. We also want to understand the impact, right? How will the adjacent community think about that corridor or the neighborhood that you're proposing this subject property be in? How will the adjacent residents, will they be able to frequent these businesses? Will they be able to be employed by these businesses? Help us understand how the adjacent community will really get impact in addition to the businesses who will occupy the premises. We'd like to understand the jobs associated with the project. How many folks do you anticipate employing, as well as any other economic impacts, growths in sales and revenue, expansion location, etc. The full question wording is available not only in the application itself, but also our funding guidelines document for this opportunity. We definitely encourage you to take a look at those funding guidelines documents before you start your application so you can begin drafting your responses. And then very lastly, we have a series of yes/no questions, whether your organization has ever been under a financial audit or review, whether you've had your tax status or your business tax receipt revoked, whether your organization is subject to any litigation, threatened or ongoing, whether your organization has been the subject of any negative press. If you answer affirmatively to any of these questions, you will be prompted to provide a brief explanation. Again, this is just a showcase or kind of a highlight of the application questions, but do know that the full length questions are available in the application as well as our funding guidelines document. In addition to the narrative that we just walked through, we're also going to be requesting some documentation and attachments. This is, again, much more involved than the microgrant opportunity. We want to make sure with these higher dollar investments that we're committed to working with a collaborative who has high organizational and financial capacity and will be capable of engaging in the acquisition and transaction process. So we would like to see a project timeline with key milestones. This will take you all the way through the transaction, buying and bidding process through to occupancy. We also would like to see a budget, and we're going to walk through the budget template in just a moment. Some organizational documentation. This is why it's really important to think about who the lead applicant will be for the collaborative. We'd like to see a resume or bio for the lead of each collaborative member. For the lead applicant organization itself, we'd like to see a copy of your formal business plan. In the case of a nonprofit, the organization's strategic plan, just better understanding what the lead applicant's 3 to 5 year horizon is. Have you been thoughtful about your business plan or your long-term growth strategy? We'd also like to see a copy of some of these relevant tax forms, a proof of the entity's incorporation, a copy of the lead organization's board of directors, if that lead organization has a board, and then copies of financial documentation for the lead organization. The lead applicant will be prepared to provide financial statements for the last year, an operating budget. So these financial statements and operating budget help us get a sense of your organization's recent financial position, whereas the cash flow projections and P&L statements help give us a sense of your organization's future financial projections. And so this helps us better understand, does this organization have sufficient cash flow and is projected to have adequate revenue in the future to realistically pay for the monthly mortgage payment that you might be incurring given the prospective purchase price? And lastly, if your organization has already been pre-approved for a mortgage or you have already signed a purchase agreement, we'd like to see copies of those documents and better understand where you're at in the financing and the acquisition process. We do need to state if your organization is selected as a finalist, we may ask for additional documentation such as bank statements, tax returns, etc., as part of the finalist review process. And so while this list is exhaustive of what is asked for at the application stage, there may be some additional documentation we request before finalizing who is selected as a funding recipient. So lastly, I'm going to share with you all the budget template that's provided to apply for this opportunity. Just to orient you to this template, you may have your own template for governing kind of the purchase process. And so we do ask that folks enter data into this template so that we can compare organizations' requests across different proposals. At the top of the spreadsheet, you will see funding sources. This is basically money in to provide and pay for the transaction. The first thing I want to call attention to is of course, the amount of funding that you will be requesting as part of OFB. There'll be a row for you to enter any additional down payment that your collaborative is bringing to the table. And then lastly, additional funding sources. As mentioned, all applicants need to finance the remainder of that purchase price. So this could be the loan for maybe the 80% loan to value relative to the 20% down. Maybe this is, grants that you anticipate or have already received from other foundations, donors, corporate donors, individuals for the purchase of the building. And this entire amount will total the purchase price and the entire, transaction at the bottom. After you delineate the sources of funding that will help pay for the transaction, we ask to see the expenses that will be incurred during the transaction. So the first item that we call attention to is the actual land and building itself. In many cases, this dollar amount for land and building will be equivalent to the purchase price, but in some cases you may be taking on additional mortgage financing for some capital improvements, remodeling, renovation, in which case the number that you put here will be actually larger than the purchase price. And you will be able to highlight some of the construction and or capital improvement costs in this section as well. the next thing I'll call attention to is the gray cells. And so these gray cells are typically items that are incurred out of pocket, and many of which are incurred before the closing. So for instance, during the transaction process, you will pay for the appraisal while you are currently in the buying process. You will pay for the inspection. You may need to pay for an environmental report. These are all items that the collaborative should be prepared to pay during the transaction process. And then the funding requests that from Open for Business will account for all of these items that are incurred at the closing table or thereafter. So for instance, prepaid property taxes, title insurance, attorney's fees, loan and mortgage fees, like those discount points, basically items that you can include in your funding request in addition to the down payment. At the end of the day, when you complete this expenses portion of the template, the number that you will be requesting from OFB down here should be equivalent to the funding request that appears in these funding sources. So this exercise in the budget template is basically like checks and balances, making sure that everything equals the same value at the end. At the end of the day, we'll want to check that all of the expenses that you will incur, the purchase price of the building, all of the closing fees, they will total this number here, which should be equivalent to the total of your incoming funding sources here, which is a combination of the down payment assistance from OFB, your mortgage financing, and any additional donations or income that would cover the entire purchase. I do know that this has been quite a lot of information, and I'm sure that you all have so many great questions in the chat, which I will get to momentarily. I just wanted to answer some final questions before we open it up. I have received questions whether this particular collective real estate ownership opportunity can cover rental costs. Per the guidelines of the funder, this funding can only be used to support the acquisition of new property. Funding cannot be used to cover any existing overhead or rental or staffing costs. So for instance, if you do need to hire a project manager to oversee this real estate acquisition process, the grant funds are not designed to cover that person's time. The grant funds are designed to be provided at closing to help you purchase and facilitate the transaction. I've received questions whether the property can include residential. Provided that the majority of the subject property is used for commercial purposes, it is possible that some of the property can be used for residences. Be thoughtful about what that split is and also about the additional management responsibilities. For a commercial property, for example, it's typically only inhabited during the day. When you become a residential lease manager and property manager, there's a lot more consideration at play. So while yes, your subject property can allow mixed use as long as the majority of it is commercial, do think judiciously about the additional responsibilities that come with being both a commercial and a residential landlord. What is the minimum and maximum number of businesses? Every collaborative at a minimum must have more than 2 constituent organizations. There is no maximum number of organizations. That math is really going to come down to like your network and folks that you are comfortable with establishing a partnership, as well as the math, right? Like what is the realistic purchase price, down payment contribution, and monthly mortgage payment that can be afforded across the members of the collaborative. I do need to note that while there is no maximum, the collaborative proposals that we receive that maximize the number of businesses and or jobs that'll be on the premises will receive priority during that review and scoring process. And lastly, we know that there's probably a lot of questions and that folks would like answered about the particular collective ownership models. We have these links in the PowerPoint, which we will be uploading to our website. These links are also available in the FAQ document so that you can get some more information about how some of these different shared ownership models work in practice. Excellent. I've already covered this question about what OFB funding can and cannot be covered. So again, OFB funding can just cover the asset and the transaction itself. The funding request cannot include staff time, training, payroll, rent, etc. And items that are covered by other OFB funding opportunities like grants and loans, they cannot be commingled. So the real estate funding is not designed to cover remodeling. If you would like a remodeling financial support, there's a loan that can cover that. But in essence, you cannot commingle the different sources of funding to cover items that are already addressed by different OFB opportunities. Excellent. So we've reached the formal presentation component of today. We have at least 34 additional minutes in the info session to answer your questions. So I'm going to start with the Q&A, and then we'll go to the chat. If you haven't already put your question in, please do so we can make sure that we address it live for the benefit of everyone on the line today. So we've received a question. Is the ownership of the real estate 50-50 or one has more percentage than the other? Also, once the property is paid off, who owns the property should one person want to leave? This is a great question, and I think this relates back to the tenancy in common or joint tenancy purchase agreement. Really, the division of the property rights will be incumbent on you and your collaborative members to talk through. While 50-50 is usually a typical arrangement, it may not be 50-50 if one of you is bringing more down payment equity to the transaction than the other. You will need to decide on, as a collaborative, how you will split ownership rights. And then depending on how the purchase agreement is structured, that will govern who remains in charge of the property if it is sold or left in the future. So for instance, in this joint tenancy arrangement, if it is set up during the purchase agreement to be 50-50, and that person chooses to sell it at some point in the future, they would be entitled then to half of 50% of the overall appraised value and or equity of the building in the future. So you do want to think about what those percentage rights may look like in your specific situation. They won't be the same for everybody, but they will, the rights or the shares that you establish at the beginning will influence how much of that equity the business can own in the future. Another attendee has asked, what if one collaborative member is not doing their part with keeping up with the payments? What can be done? What if they're not holding up their end of the bargain? Yeah, that's a really excellent question. And it's something that we see all the time with commercial and frankly, residential real estate. I do think that you may want to institute kind of contractual agreements with every single member of the collaborative who will inhabit the space. So whether that's the nonprofit community land trust owner is authoring contracts with any of the businesses that it brings on site. And then it would be treated like any other contract or breach of contract, right? There is always the risk of eviction and or expulsion if those members can't keep up with their payments. Again, we do recommend that you retain legal counsel for this transaction and bring some of these questions to them. Highly recommend that no matter which of these models you're implementing, there is a contractual agreement, not just between the lead applicant and the seller, but with the lead applicant and all of the constituent businesses in the collaborative. Somebody has asked, does the requirement for a BIPOC executive director CEO, will you also examine and or consider the demographic composition of the board of directors, essentially being mindful of quote figurehead leadership to ensure that BIPOC people are truly in control of the organization? Yes, this is an excellent question, and it is part of the reason why we asked for a copy of the list of the board of directors to better understand who is not only at the helm of the organization organizationally, but also who is advising that organization from a strategic direction. You will also be asked in the application to enumerate some details about your staff, as well as the race and ethnic identity of your staff. And so we really would love to prioritize organizations that are not only led by BIPOC and for the benefit of everyone on the line that refers to Black, Indigenous people of color. We would definitely like to see not only that the organization is led by somebody from a historically underserved background, but also employs and retains employees from those backgrounds as well. Another question, what effort will be undertaken to ensure that the funded organizations are organic to the population / neighborhood / demographic intended by the grant and not a mainstream organization looking to expand into these spaces? This is a really, really excellent question. And I do want to say for the first round of funding, it is more probable that higher capacity organizations who have already been looking at property acquisition are more likely to get funded simply because we have not yet ramped up our technical assistance resources, We don't yet have those in place to help every applicant in every neighborhood. However, the narrative questions that we're asking are really going to try to get at this, especially impact overview. For example, when we ask how the adjacent community will benefit from this project, we want to understand, has there been any community engagement efforts undertaken? How many folks from the adjacent community actually work at or will use the facilities in question. We want to understand who is at the helm of the organization. So that's a really excellent question. We're striving to keep that at the forefront, and it's influencing the types of questions that are being asked of the collaborative. I do want to flag that we did lift the $1 million eligibility requirement for this opportunity. So it is likely that some larger nonprofit organizations might apply. We do think that it's more feasible for organizations with larger revenues to be able to secure the mortgage financing and afford the monthly payment necessary. But at the end of the day, we still need to see that all prospective occupants will be small businesses and will be prioritizing community-led and community-driven organizations in the community that they are planning to inhabit that property. I hope that helped to answer that question. I'm now going to turn attention to the questions in the chat, but feel free to keep them coming in the Q&A as well. Just to revisit, Marianne asked, I know I answered this earlier, whether the collaborative has to have site control in order to apply for the down payment request. Hopefully now that you've seen the remainder of the funding explanation, the idea is that the collaborative at the end of the transaction will have control of the site. They will own it outright, and they will be getting assistance during the transaction and closing process to buy that building. Alina had asked a question about sole proprietorships applying to nonprofits. Again, we want to see organizations that preferably retain staff or that have more than one, organization at the ready. If you have a more specific question or case that you want to run by us, please email us offline and I can be more helpful with your question. Josh has asked if there's a list of neighborhoods that might become eligible if the next cycle sees the opening up of more. I will say that any communities that we prioritize will originate from the list of targeted urban areas at a minimum. We began with the list of targeted urban areas and took on a very concerted stakeholder listening tour and met with individuals across all of those communities in order to come up with the final list. So they will originate from that list at a minimum, but I can't say for certain that that will happen until we see the quality and the volume of funding requests that we receive in this funding cycle. Alina has asked, are there funds for nonprofits for the planning process of establishing collaborative partnerships? That's a really great question, Alina. At this juncture, Miami Open for Business is not offering grant funds to help with the planning phase. The way that the program has been designed and with guidelines from the funder, it's really positioned to help folks with asset building and acquisition, not necessarily planning or again training. But do know that beginning in 2023 of next year, we will have technical assistance providers that will receive grants from Miami Open for Business to help prospective applicants, and your organization can work with one of those TA providers to help you think about that planning process free of charge. Lebby has asked what if there is two different organizations, but the founder is the same person? I think it's fair for that organization to be a part of the collaborative, provided that there's more, organizations in the mix as well. We would just simply be remiss to fund, the acquisition of a property that at the end of the day only benefits one or the same people. So again, we'd really like to see a mix of organizations, but it's okay if, say, two of those four organizations have the same founder, just provided that there's more diversity and more number of overall entrepreneurs and small businesses who can benefit in the transaction. Susan asked, can a nonprofit own the property or would an LLC holding company have to be created? Susan, that's an excellent question. It is not a requirement to create a holding company. However, there can be certain tax advantages in either direction. I know of several nonprofits who have owned their property for some time. I would encourage you to maybe reach out for them and ask them for recommendations. For instance, nonprofit tax exemption can sometimes come into play when you are the owner versus LLCs, creating more diversion of liability from like yourself, the organization entity versus the holding company. I am not an attorney. This does not constitute legal advice. I definitely implore you to talk to some nonprofits who do already own their facilities, as they can walk you through the pros and cons of either of those approaches. Awesome. I'm seeing a lull in the chat in terms of any additional questions. At this time, we still have a full 25 minutes in the planned info session. If anybody would like to come off of mute, ask your question, put it in the chat or the Q&A box. More than happy to answer any lingering questions you might have. Levy, I see that you have your hand raised. Would you like to come off of mute and ask your question if it hasn't already been answered? I think I can unmute you. Oh, okay. I've asked you to unmute yourself. I have asked you to unmute yourself and hopefully. Oh, Libby has said that her question has already been answered. Okay, great.
I've already received an answer. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Okay, great. And H. Lee, your hand is raised.
Yes, I'd like to follow up. Thank you, first of all, for the opportunity and for the webinar. I'd like to follow up on a couple of questions I posted earlier. My understanding, just kind of at a very high level for this type of an opportunity, is to really give access to capital for organizations that have been locked out of that process historically, not being able to access capital to attain property. So I wanted to understand how you're going to balance that motive with also funding organizations that are probably in a pretty good financial position to be the first movers for this type of an opportunity. Like, what's the balance to make sure that this is an opening for organizations that truly have not had an opportunity to access this kind of funding in the past?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And I think it's something that we are all struggling with as we launch this initiative. We really wanted to get the ball rolling on funding cycles as soon as possible so folks can start preparing their application. But we know that some of the most underserved businesses may need a leg up or they may need assistance, you know, walking through the mortgage pre-approval process, looking at property, et cetera. So we're really seeing the announcement of this program to kind of help foment enthusiasm for those exact processes. I do lament that we don't have all of those resources in place just yet. We will have them in place at the beginning of next year. And so in the meantime, to help kind of start with the property acquisition process, we're sharing the guidelines, we're sharing kind of the program parameters, really seeing this as a conversation starter for a lot of businesses. Maybe, you know, one's financial statements are not in order right now. Maybe they haven't filed their taxes in the last year and change due to COVID. But by the time, you know, the third funding cycle is launched in the fall of 2023, they are ready to go. The money is still available. We got a lot of support from Wells Fargo, and we want to make sure that that comes out over the next couple of years. And so while it may be, you know, an organization in this first round who has already been pre-approved, has a larger, you know, budget, that is not kind of the ideal candidate for funding cycles in the future. We just have to balance, you know, what resources we can provide for the program, making sure that we're investing in folks that will use the funds judiciously, while at the same time providing resources to help folks who aren't yet ready get ready, so that by the end of this initiative, and we look back on all 5 funding cycles and we look at who we funded, it is exactly in line with what you said, helping marginalized businesses who are maybe quickly getting displaced or gentrified own their own spot and put down roots in the community in which they've historically operated. Does that answer your question a little bit better?
Yes, it does, but I'm glad to hear that that is top of mind, and subsequent funding cycles may keep us, you know, keep the organization true to what the mission of the funding is. So thank you. It does answer my question.
Of course. And I mean, don't not like, you know, if you feel that you're in that boat, we also don't want to discourage you from applying right now. We just know it is such a lengthy process, right? Like looking at sites, you know, understanding comparables on the market, understanding your monthly cash flow equation relative to the mortgage that you would need to incur. These are all just like really important and heady things to talk about. And so this is kind of like a moment to get together, talk with your potential collaborative constituents, see if this is something you could pull together and then prepare over the next few weeks and months. Awesome. Any other questions on the line? If anyone would like to come off mute or put it in the chat or put it in the Q&A box. I did see a question, sorry, apologies, Danielle, that I missed it earlier. And what if the nonprofit serves the underserved communities mentioned? At this time, the eligibility criteria for the initiative is that the organizations are owned or led by individuals from historically underserved backgrounds. So if your organization is a predominantly white-led organization, but operates in one of the 7 communities, I would definitely encourage your organization to maybe give deference or to think about some of the adjacent organizations who are led by BIPOC folks who are looking to put down roots in these communities, as this is who the funding opportunity is intended for at this time. Sure. So H. Lee asks, are you open to sharing the list of attendees to catalyze some future possible collaborations? Oh, I think that's a really great question. I don't know that I've gotten permission from everybody to share, but how about everyone in the chat right now, just say your name, the organization that you're attending on behalf of, and the neighborhood that you're located in, and we can see if there's some immediate synergies and just an understanding where everyone is phoning in from. So don't be shy. I'll put your name, organization, and neighborhood in the chat, and we can get a sense of where everyone is tuning in from and interested in this opportunity. When you reply in the chat, you may need to note send to everyone versus send to host and panelist. So I see Josh and Marianne, you might have to resend that so everyone can see. Perfect. Awesome. Great. We've got some great all the way across the map. Great. I see some hands have been raised again. So I'm going to go ahead. Susan, I have asked you to unmute, and you can please come off mute and ask your question.
Hi. Okay, well, first of all, I want to say, Brittany, thank you so much for all of that information. Of course, as a nonprofit director for 26 years and spending 48 years serving the needs of South Dade, I'm sitting here and I'm saying to myself, so I wanted to kind of reiterate what Ms. Tony said. You know, it's so important that this is such an important opportunity for us. But there's got to be a way where we as nonprofits that have been serving this community for such a long time find the expertise or the experts to help lead us through this. If not, we're going to be left out. I can tell you that right now. I mean, just the fact that we have to bring, you know, a lot of money to the table is already in my mind saying, oh, heck, where the hell am I going to get this money from? So, you know, so it may look like a very daunting, and it is a very daunting process. But I think that making this opportunity or making this opportunity available to us is wonderful. But I think that it has to go a little bit beyond that, Brittany. And I look forward to speaking to you tomorrow on this. But, you know, how do we find money? Where do we get, you know, because some of us may not know how to do that. So I would just ask the foundation to kind of think about that as well.
Oh, absolutely. No, that Susan, that's a really great point. It's very well taken. Beginning next year, we're really excited and hope to have kind of like a bench of, you know, pro bono, like for instance, real estate attorneys. They do a lot of pro bono transactional work. We hope to have an entire commercial real estate workshop series. You know, how do I apply for a mortgage? How do I understand how much mortgage I can afford, et cetera? Just at this time, we're not able to have those resources in place. And I do lament that they could not be available sooner to help precisely the types of organizations that you're talking about. But we are very committed to making this available to everybody. And so please be on the lookout for some more of those resources. This may be as a time instead for your organization to think about, like, who do I trust partnering with? If I did want to co-own a facility or a space, what is that other organization that I could do it with? Really look at your financials and try to prepare for future funding cycles when we will have some more resources, workshops, consultants, et cetera, at the ready to help out.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And I say, Immacula, would you like to come off mute and your hand is raised to ask your question?
Okay, hi, yes, this is Immaculate. Good afternoon. Yeah, my question is, I think you probably answered already, but I just wanted to put it out there. Like, what if you don't have, you know, someone to collab with? However, I know that my business will impact and help individuals within the community. So based on my information I just posted, maybe, you know, there could be some collaboration there because I know that I'm in real estate and it might be someone that like do inspection, appraisal, lending, or environmental services. It doesn't matter, but I know that I personally don't have anyone that I can collaborate with. Maybe you guys can facilitate that or help us to find someone that can collaborate with us to help.
Yeah, that's a really great suggestion. And I know that H. Lee felt the same way. And so if you guys would like to also, I know you put your names and if you'd like to also maybe put your email or your contact information in the chat and get some conversations going. I think that's why I wanted to see everyone's neighborhoods, so you see if there's somebody in your neighborhood as well that you could think about working together. We've not yet thought about like a collaborative like matchmaker, but it definitely seems like there's a need for this. And so we will think back as a team. Gloria, by the way, you put your email address in, but you do need to say send to everyone versus just sending to the hosts and the panelists. And that way everyone in the chat will be able to see your contact info. I do think, Immaculata, that your expertise as a real estate agent could come in handy with a potential collaborator. And so if you guys are interested in contacting her email's in the chat. And just calling attention to like seeing who else in the chat is maybe in your neighborhood or in your same community and thinking about working together. Like for instance, I know Immaculata, you said that you're in North Miami Beach, and Leiby is in North Miami Beach as well. Just thinking about working together a little bit more closely. That's a great suggestion. Thank you. Great. So we technically have 13 minutes left on the clock. I knew we would need a full 90 minutes to get through this really, really rich information, but this concludes the formal presentation. So if you have any other questions, raise your hand, put them in the chat or the Q&A, or you can follow up with more specifics about your particular proposal or case to our email, which I will put in the chat as well. Actually, that is not the email address, please. There we go. That's the correct address. Okay. Awesome. Julius is interested in speaking with you, H. Lee. And it looks like there's a couple of people who are all based in North Miami Beach as well. So I'm glad to get the conversation going. There's no obligation to attend Thursday's session. It'll be the repeat information as you received today, but in case you're available, we'll be reprising this session on Thursday morning at 10 a.m. The slides will be the same, but the attendees will be different, and you never know who you might meet or questions you might get. Leiby, I will try my best to share the attendance list. I would like to maybe ask for permission before I do that and give out folks' email addresses, but I will do my best to collaborate and share. Awesome. And I do know that there was one person, I think Renee Valdez, usted quería la información de esta sesión en español. Tenemos toda esta documentación y toda la información en español en nuestro sitio web, pero si le hace falta una sesión individual, por favor me manda un correo en el Open for Business, el correo electrónico que yo puse en el chat. Okay. Awesome. So this concludes the formal portion of the webinar. I'm going to stop recording now. I'll hang around if anyone has any additional questions, but really, really appreciate you being here today, your enthusiasm for this work. It's bold, it's exciting. We've never done anything like this before, and really appreciate all your great enthusiasm and questions as we look to roll this out over the next 2 years.